Today, we are jumping into an examination of an incredibly sensitive and complex case. It remains one of the most publicly documented instances of vigilantism in American history.
That's right. We're analyzing the source material surrounding the 1984 killing of Jeffrey Doucet by Leon Gary Plauché.
And this sequence of events, it really brought these fundamental questions about law, parental anguish, and the very limits of justice right into the public spotlight.
Our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to meticulously go through the sources we have on this tragedy. We'll follow the exact chronology, starting with the abuse and the kidnapping.
Right, and then moving to that astonishingly public act of vengeance.
And finally, to the controversial legal aftermath. But, and this is crucial, we have to approach this subject with deep sensitivity.
Absolutely. Recognizing the profound and lasting trauma that was suffered by the victim at the heart of this story, Joseph Boyce Plauché, or Jody, as he was known.
The central figures are probably recognizable to many of you listening. First, there's Leon Gary Plauché, born in 1945, a father from Baton Rouge who, became this American vigilante figure.
Then there's Jeffrey Doucet, the perpetrator, born in 1959. His actions are what set this entire tragedy in motion.
And of course, Joseph Boyce Plauché, born in 1972. He was just 11 years old when all of this culminated back in 1984.
This case is so unique, not just because of the emotional weight of the crimes, but because the climax, the moment of retaliation, was captured entirely on video.
Exactly. And that video gives it this singular, enduring presence in legal and cultural discussions. The sources really force us to ask some tough questions about how the legal system responds when public outrage just, hits a boiling point.
We're going to explore how Plauché, who was initially charged with second-degree murder, managed to secure a legal outcome that let him avoid any prison time.
An outcome that relied heavily on arguments of a complete psychological breakdown.
And maybe the most vital part of our exploration today is following the long-term journey of Jody Plauché himself. It's a journey that, well, it leads to a really surprising path of healing and advocacy.
When you look at all the sources comprehensively, you see that the conversation this case started was really centered on whether the law, as it's written, could ever adequately address the extreme circumstances that drove Gary Plauché's actions.
It's an exploration into documented outcomes, legal precedents, and the human cost.
And it all stems from the horrific abuse suffered by Jody Plauché.
To really understand the intensity of the climax, we have to start at the beginning, the prelude to this tragedy and the circumstances that were really breaking the Plauché family apart in early 1984. So let's start with Gary Plauché's background, as the sources detail it.
Right. So Plauché was a Baton Rouge native. He was an established member of his community. He had military experience as well. He'd served as a former sergeant in the United States Air Force.
And he had a stable career, right?
Yes, a heavy equipment salesman. So it's the profile of an ordinary working American father.
And there's a crucial personal detail, one that's often overlooked, but was cited later in the psychological evaluations, and that's his marital status at the time of the shooting.
Yes, that's a key point.
Yeah.
The sources confirm that Plauché was separated from his wife, June Sheridan, when the shooting happened.
Which created a vulnerability.
The huge vulnerability within the family unit. And as we'll get into, the psychological analysis strongly suggests that this vulnerability was actively exploited by the perpetrator, Doucet.
So let's talk about Jeffrey Doucet. He was 25 years old at the time. How did he get access to the family and specifically to young Jody?
Doucet was Jody's karate instructor.
Ah, so a position of trust.
Exactly, the position of trust and authority. It's a classic pattern documented in so many cases of abuse. He wasn't some stranger on the street. He was a mentor figure, someone respected by the family.
And that allowed him to cultivate this relationship with Jody that, well, tragically masked the abuse that was happening underneath.
It did. And the sources are very clear that this was not a sudden one-off event. The abuse had been systematic and it was prolonged.
That's the most shocking discovery in the source material, I think. The sexual abuse had been going on for a significant amount of time.
For at least a year, from 1983 into 1984, before the whole situation escalated into the kidnapping.
And Jody was only 11 years old. That duration, it just underscores the pervasive psychological trauma that was being inflicted long before the final catastrophic break.
It really does.
And that brings us to the devastating escalation on February 14th, 1984, Valentine's Day.
The date itself, it just adds this layer of ironic cruelty to the whole event.
It does. What happened that day?
On that day, Doucet kidnapped Jody. The sources confirm he immediately transported the boy across state lines, driving west to a motel in Anaheim, California.
So this immediately becomes a federal case.
Right. This interstate movement transformed the crime into a major national manhunt and added that layer of federal gravity to the charges Doucet would eventually face.
And the sources are explicit about what happened during that time, during the confinement in California.
Yes, unfortunately, the material confirms that the sexual assault and molestation continued to occur during the time Doucet held Jody captive in that California motel. The crime was continuous, which just escalated this sense of terror and powerlessness for Jody and soon enough for his entire family.
I can't even imagine what the family must have been going through during that nationwide search, just the sheer anxiety. How did that period finally come to an end?
Well, fortunately, confinement ended because of a lapse in Doucet's control.
A mistake on his part.
A critical mistake. The sources reveal that Doucet allowed Jody to place a collect call to his mother, June, from the motel. That one moment of connection was the lifeline they needed.
And law enforcement acted on that call immediately.
Absolutely. The call allowed California police to trace the location. They raided the Anaheim motel and arrested Doucet on February 29, 1984.
Was there any resistance?
No. The sources note that the arrest happened without incident. Doucet offered no resistance at all.
So Jody was returned to Louisiana pretty quickly after that, arriving back on March 1st, 1984.
Right, and this marks the beginning of that 2-week period during which Gary Plauché's rage and his helplessness just escalated into what would become that televised ambush.
This specific period is so essential for understanding Plauché's legal defense later on. The sources actually give us an official, on-the-record, emotional snapshot of him.
They do. It's taken just after his son's return, after he had learned the full extent of the assaults.
And what did he tell the news crews? Because this testimony of anguish, it really became the foundation of his argument for temporary insanity.
Plauché spoke to reporters, and he expressed this profound sense of anguish and impotence. He said that after hearing the reports of the sexual assault, he felt a sense of helplessness and did not know how to deal with the situation.
That feeling that he was utterly unable to protect his child, and the failure, to detect the abuse over the past year, that's the raw emotional state that was documented right before the killing.
It's critical. He was an Air Force veteran, a salesman, a man who was probably accustomed to being in control of his life.
And suddenly the sources portray him as totally derailed, unable to rely on the legal system to satisfy his need for immediate retribution or to somehow erase what had happened.
Precisely. His emotional and psychological state, as it's captured there, suggests this desperate search for control, for a form of justice outside the established legal channels.
And that sets the stage for the dramatic confrontation that followed just over 2 weeks later.
That intense period of waiting, combined with that documented helplessness, it all culminated on March 16, 1984.
That's the day Doucet was being transferred back to Louisiana to face trial for the kidnapping and abuse. Let's try to set the scene for the confrontation at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport.
So Doucet was flown back specifically to face those serious state charges. His flight arrived that evening around 9:30 p.m., and Gary Plauché was already there. He was in position, waiting inside the airport terminal.
And the sources make it absolutely clear this was not a chance encounter. This was a planned ambush.
Not at all.
And there's this shocking element of, I guess you'd call it institutional failure, because the local media played a direct role in making Plauché's plan possible.
This is one of the most ethically fraught aspects of the source material. The local ABC affiliate, WBRZ-TV, was scheduled to film Doucet's arrival.
Right.
And crucially, an employee of that station, WBRZ-TV, informed Plauché of the exact time and location of Doucet's arrival.
That's a huge point. It really moves the media's role beyond just documenting what happened.
And to direct facilitation of a criminal act.
They gave him the critical non-public intelligence he needed.
They did. A WBRZ news crew was already setting up their cameras to film the perp walk, which tragically created the perfect scenario for Plauché's vengeance. A filmed public execution.
So Plauché wasn't just, staking out the airport hoping for a glimpse. He was acting on a confirmed schedule that was provided by the very media organization that was covering the story.
Exactly.
What did the sources say about his strategic positioning and how he prepared?
He was waiting very strategically opposite the news crew. He positioned himself near a bank of payphones, and he used a simple disguise, just a baseball cap and sunglasses, to avoid being immediately recognized.
But the sources reveal a level of calculation that kind of contradicts the idea of a simple, impulsive act of fury.
It does. The most chilling detail is his use of the payphone. He was reportedly talking to his best friend, just using the phone conversation as a cover, a way to look normal.
And the most tactical element.
His surveillance method. He was tracking the reflection of the news camera lights on the wall. As the cameras pivoted to follow the approaching police escort in Doucet, Plauché knew his target was just moments away.
That reflection was his cue.
It was his signal.
That kind of cold, calculated waiting, using the media's light source as a trigger. It contrasts so sharply with the temporary psychosis defense we're going to talk about later.
It really does. It demonstrates a capacity for deliberate, focused action, even if it was driven by extreme emotion.
It shows premeditation of the act, even if the motive itself was born from trauma.
Right. The sources paint this picture of a man focused entirely on his objective. He was ignoring the public setting, ignoring the police presence.
So describe the moment of the shooting itself, as it was captured on that video footage.
Doucet was being escorted, in handcuffs, by police officers through the terminal. As they passed the news crew, they walked directly past Plauché.
And that's when he moved.
Plauché moved quickly. He drew a small .22 caliber revolver, fired a single shot at point-blank range, and struck Doucet on the right side of his head, near his right ear.
The action itself was so immediate and decisive. What was Plauché's reaction in the moments right after the shot?
Doucet immediately fell to the floor, bleeding profusely. And Plauché's first action, which is documented so clearly by the video, was to simply place the telephone receiver, which he was still holding, back onto the hook.
Wow, just hangs up the phone.
Just hangs up the phone. Yeah. The police officers, who were stunned by the sudden violence, immediately restrained Plauché and disarmed him.
And the officers knew him, didn't they? That must have just compounded the shock for everyone there.
They did. The sources document their immediate emotional reaction when they recognized him.
Yeah.
It was, "Gary, why? Why Gary?"
That intimate, distressed questioning from law enforcement, it speaks volumes about the community's recognition of Plauché and the profound shock that this ordinary man had committed such a spectacular, violent act.
It does.
And Doucet didn't die instantly.
No. He fell into a coma and died the next day, March 17th, 1984.
And the sources confirm the entire event. The waiting, the shot, the immediate aftermath was all captured on videotape by that WBRZ news crew, the same crew that had provided the arrival time.
Right.
The sources really emphasize the enduring nature of this footage. This video has become a historical document of vengeance.
Its legacy is pervasive. The footage immediately became an item of extreme public interest, but its lifespan has extended so far beyond that.
It's been used in other media, hasn't it?
Yes. The sources note its inclusion in some controversial media, like the 1994 shockumentary Traces of Death 2. But perhaps more significantly, it was used in mainstream documentaries. Most notably, Michael Moore's 2002 film Bowling for Columbine.
Right, to discuss the nature of American violence and gun culture.
Exactly. And the fact that it has amassed tens of millions of views on public platforms like YouTube just reinforces its status as a defining visual artifact of American vigilantism and tragedy.
It really ensures that this singular, tragic act, performed decades ago, remains constantly in the public consciousness. It's always there, shaping perceptions of justice outside the courtroom.
The case transitioned instantly from a personal tragedy to a public debate, all because a camera was there.
Now we have to turn to the legal proceedings, which in many ways are even more shocking than the crime itself. Plauché was immediately charged with a severe crime, especially given the premeditation involved.
That's right. He was initially charged with second-degree murder. This charge typically applies to killings where there is intent to kill, but maybe not the extreme, detailed premeditation that's required for first-degree murder.
And given the details, the cap, the sunglasses, using the camera reflection, this charge seemed appropriate, right?
On surface, yes,
Yeah.
It seemed like a solid charge.
And yet the case never actually went to trial. Plauché accepted a plea agreement.
Correct. The prosecution accepted a plea bargain, then allowed Plauché to plead no contest to the lesser charge of manslaughter.
Let's clarify the difference here for our listeners.
Yeah.
Manslaughter is a significantly reduced charge compared to second-degree murder.
Oh, absolutely. The legal difference is rooted in intent and state of mind. Second-degree murder implies a deliberate intent to kill or cause serious bodily harm.
Whereas manslaughter...
Manslaughter, in this context, implies the killing happened either in the heat of passion or without that premeditation, often stemming from extreme provocation or a state where rational control was diminished.
So, the defense's ability to get the charge reduced from murder to manslaughter essentially meant convincing the state that Plauché's actions, though they were fatal, were a reaction to immediate and severe psychological distress. It was a critical legal shift.
A massive shift.
He pleaded no contest. The sources state this means he's accepting the punishment without admitting guilt. But why would the prosecution agree to such a major reduction, especially in a case with overwhelming televised evidence of the act?
This is where the legal maneuvering, which is heavily implied by the source material, becomes really fascinating. The sources suggest the prosecution faced a massive challenge in securing a conviction on a murder charge.
And what was that challenge?
The primary concern was the extremely high probability of jury nullification.
Can you explain that concept for us?
Sure. Jury nullification is what happens when a jury, even if they believe the defendant is technically guilty under the law, chooses to acquit them or convict them on a lesser charge because they believe the law itself, or the application of the punishment, would be unjust in that specific circumstance.
So they basically ignore the letter of the law in favor of what they see as a more just outcome.
Exactly. And given the horrific nature of Doucet's crime and Plauché's documented anguish, the defense knew that a local Louisiana jury would almost certainly sympathize deeply with Plauché.
Which would make a murder conviction nearly impossible to achieve regardless of the video evidence.
That's the crucial context. The prosecution's acceptance of manslaughter wasn't a sign of weakness in the evidence, but rather an acknowledgement of the overwhelming public sentiment and the political reality of trying to send a grieving father to prison.
It was a pragmatic legal decision.
It was, to ensure some kind of conviction, rather than risking a complete acquittal by an emotionally moved jury.
And what was the astonishing result of this plea agreement? What was the sentence?
Plauché received a 7-year suspended sentence, coupled with 5 years probation and 300 additional hours of community service.
Let me just repeat that. A 7-year suspended sentence.
Yes. And the critical defining element of the sentence is that he received no prison time whatsoever. He completed his community service by 1989, and that effectively ended his legal obligation shortly thereafter.
How was this outcome even justified, particularly the complete avoidance of incarceration? The defense rested heavily on this argument of a temporary psychotic state.
It did. The defense team successfully argued that the trauma, the stress, and the revelation of the prolonged abuse inflicted on his son drove Plauché to a state where he was temporarily unable to grasp the difference between right and wrong.
Which is an extremely high bar to meet in court, even during a plea negotiation.
Incredibly high.
Who was the key expert who provided the clinical foundation for this defense?
That would be psychiatrist Edward Puz. He examined Plauché and provided the necessary clinical assessment.
And what was his conclusion?
Dr. Doucet concluded that at the exact time of the killing, Plauché lacked the capacity to distinguish between right and wrong. This finding essentially provided the legal justification for the reduced charge. It classified his action as one driven by a temporary psychological failure rather than by persistent criminal malice.
The psychological reports, according to the sources, also provided a chilling analysis of Jeffrey Doucet's behavior.
Yes, and this supported the defense's narrative that Plauché was, in a way, a victim of psychological manipulation himself.
How so?
Dr. Doucet's analysis extended beyond Plauché's state of mind. He determined that Doucet was highly manipulative and had specifically exploited the vulnerabilities in the Plauché household.
He noted the separation between Gary and his wife.
Exactly. He noted that Doucet had taken advantage of Gary and June Plauché's separation, managing to, in the psychiatrist's words, wedge his way into the Plauché family, which facilitated his access to the young victim.
That detail is so important because it shifts the focus slightly. It shows the trauma wasn't just the kidnapping, it was the realization that the father had been psychologically outmaneuvered by the abuser over a year-long period.
And that contributed to that feeling of helplessness.
Yeah.
It bolsters the defense's argument by providing context for Plauché's breakdown. It wasn't just the news of the assault, but the devastating realization of the manipulation and the lengthy betrayal of trust that had destabilized the entire family unit.
The final decision rested with Judge Frank Saya. When you consider the severity of the act, a televised execution, the reasoning for the suspended sentence had to be extremely compelling. What was Judge Saya's stated justification?
Judge Saya's reasoning was largely utilitarian. It prioritized future safety and societal benefit over pure punitive retribution. He ruled that imprisoning Plauché would not help anyone.
And crucially,
And crucially, he determined that there was virtually no risk of him committing another crime.
that determination, virtually no risk of recidivism, is the legal linchpin here. It essentially confirms the court's acceptance that Plauché's crime was entirely situational and not indicative of a generalized threat to public safety.
Exactly. The ruling established Plauché as this unique case where the confluence of extreme trauma and the circumstances of the victim of the crime excused the traditional penalty.
Yeah.
For the legal system to apply such a pragmatic standard over retributive justice is what makes the Plauché outcome so unique in American law.
And Plauché himself, he never expressed any remorse for the act. His comments after the sentence consistently defended his actions.
No, he did not. When asked why he shot Doucet, Plauché consistently maintained that he was entirely justified. He framed his act not as an individual failure, but as a universally understandable reaction to the horrific crime Doucet committed.
He argued that any parent in a similar situation would have done the same thing.
Yes, citing if somebody did it to your kid, you do it too.
That simple yet deeply provocative statement, it encapsulates the public sympathy that protected him legally. And the sources confirm he held this stance throughout his entire life.
Even decades later. In an interview cited in the sources when he was 67 around 2013, Plauché explicitly stated he did not regret killing Doucet and affirmed that he would do it again if the circumstances were repeated. This unwavering conviction really defines his narrative in the public sphere.
While the legal outcome dominated the headlines, the person whose life was most permanently altered was Jody Plauché. It's vital that we now shift our focus entirely to his experience.
Absolutely. Moving beyond the father's vengeance to the survivor's long and courageous journey toward healing.
And the sources provide significant updates on his life following the events of 1984.
They do. And Jody's initial reaction to his father's action reveals the profound and confusing complexity of the trauma he endured. It's a detail that demands very sensitive attention.
What exactly was his documented initial reaction to the killing of Jeffrey Doucet?
In his 2019 book, Why Gary Why? The Jody Plauché story, Jody revealed a painful truth. He said he was initially upset at his father for killing Doucet.
That's so counterintuitive to what many might expect from a victim.
It is, but it speaks directly to the psychological manipulation involved in long-term abuse.
It highlights the devastating effect of trauma bonding, where the victim relies on the abuser for survival and forms an attachment, often confusing manipulation with mentorship or affection.
Exactly. Jody viewed Doucet not only as his abuser, but also as a trusted friend and mentor. The sudden, violent removal of that figure, even an abusive one, was initially disorienting and upsetting for him as a child.
It's a powerful illustration of how the psychological scars of abuse can far outweigh the physical ones. It creates this deeply confusing sense of loss alongside the trauma.
It does.
So the father's act of vengeance, which was meant to be liberating, initially just added another layer of complexity to the victim's emotional recovery. How did JD process this over time? How did he eventually reconcile his feelings toward his father?
The sources confirm that reconciliation was a process. It occurred as Jody matured and gained the emotional tools to truly process the nature of his relationship with Doucet and his father's motivation. He eventually recognized that his father's action, while violent, stemmed from love and a broken heart.
And his story becomes one of profound transformation. He chose not to be defined solely by the abuse or by the violence that followed. He embarked on this path of activism and helping others.
His dedication is exemplary. Jody Plauché transformed his experience into public service and advocacy for other survivors. He attended Louisiana State University.
And there he demonstrated his commitment to shifting cultural norms by serving on the executive board of Men Against Violence.
A remarkable step, moving from personal trauma to advocating for structural change and prevention.
And his career path continued on that trajectory.
It did. Upon graduation, he worked professionally as a sexual assault counselor at the Victim Services Center of Montgomery County. This path, from victim to counselor, demonstrates a profound commitment to using his personal pain to help others heal.
It adds this crucial layer of redemption to a story that's otherwise so steeped in legal and emotional darkness.
It's the most hopeful part of the entire narrative.
And his current perspective, 4 decades later, it provides a sense of closure to this chapter of his life.
A recent 2024 update, marking the 40th anniversary of the events, is included in the source material. In an interview, Jody stated clearly that he was happy with his life now.
And importantly, he publicly affirmed his feelings for his father.
Yes. Regarding Gary Plauché as the greatest dad of all time, That declaration signals a complete and lasting emotional reconciliation with his father's memory and his ultimate acceptance of the context surrounding that violent act.
Before we close out, let's quickly recap the final years of Gary Plauché's life.
Gary Plauché suffered a debilitating stroke in 2011. He died a few years later in 2014 at the age of 68 after suffering another stroke while residing in a nursing home.
And he lived out his life as a free man, a consequence of Judge Saya's decision.
He did. And his case remains a benchmark for studying this specific type of situational violence.
It's frequently referenced in discussions about American vigilantism targeting sex offenders, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Particularly because of the public nature of the act and the legal leniency he received. The source material mentions similar cases like Ellie Nessler and Marianne Bachmeier, but the Plauché case is really distinguished by the technological documentation, the video, and that specific psychological defense that successfully mitigated his punishment.
It continues to exemplify the tension between personal justice and the state's monopoly on force.
Perfectly put.
As we draw this exploration to a close, let's synthesize the most crucial findings from the source material regarding the Plauché case. We have the unprecedented public documentation, the literal filming of a premeditated killing in a public space.
We have the highly sophisticated and successful legal defense that utilized the concept of temporary psychosis, allowing the defendant to transition from a murder charge to manslaughter and avoid any incarceration.
Which highlights the unique ability of situational factors and public sympathy to influence the application of justice.
And we have the profoundly powerful story of the survivor, Jody Plauché. His journey from an initial confusing attachment to his abuser through reconciliation with his father to becoming a dedicated sexual abuse counselor is the most resonant and, I think, hopeful part of this entire chronology.
This story is fundamentally about the limits of law when it's confronted with overwhelming visceral trauma. The sources highlight Judge Saya's reasoning for the suspended sentence. The judge concluded that imprisoning Plauché would not help anyone and that the risk of future crime was virtually no risk.
Right.
This raises a powerful final question for you to consider, and it's drawn directly from the reasoning presented in the source material. When the legal system is tasked with ensuring public safety and exacting retribution, how should it weigh those goals against the unique psychological factors and situational despair presented in a case like Plauché's? A case where the presiding judge determined that the punishment simply served no constructive purpose for society or the individual.
The Plauché, which is so meticulously documented across these sources, provides a rare, complex, and sometimes uncomfortable illustration of how legal systems grapple with the intersection of personal tragedy, public rage, and the elusive definition of justice.
Thanks for listening.